Eve, and I'm from Grace Gospel Home Educators, and I'll be performing for you today. Mrs. Rachel Lynde is properly horrified, taken from Anne of Green Gables by L. M. Montgomery. Mrs. Rachel Lynde visits her friend Marilla to discuss what she believes is an ill-advised circumstance of Marilla taking in Anne, an orphan girl, to help out on the farm. Rachel begins her exchange with Marilla. "I've been hearing some surprising things about you and Matthew lately." "I don't suppose you're any more surprised than I am myself," said Marilla. "It was too bad there was such a mistake. Couldn't you have sent her back?" "I suppose we could have, but we decided not to. And when I make up my mind to do a thing, it stays made up. I suppose you'd like to see Anne. I'll call her in." "Well, they didn't pick you for your looks, that's sure and certain," was Mrs. Rachel Lynde's emphatic comment. "She's terribly skinny and homely, Marilla. Come here, child, and let me have a look at you. Lawful heart! Did anyone ever see such freckles? And hair as red as carrots? Come here, child, and let me have a look at you." Anne came there, but not exactly as Mrs. Rachel had expected. With one bound, she crossed the kitchen floor and stood before the surprised Mrs. Rachel, her face scarlet with anger, her lips quivering, and her whole slender form trembling from head to foot. "I hate you! I hate you! I hate you! I hate you! How dare you call me skinny and ugly? How dare you call me freckled and red-headed? You are a rude, impolite, unfeeling woman!" "Anne," exclaimed Marilla in consternation, "how dare you say such things about me? How would you like to have such things said about you? How would you like to be told that you are fat and ugly and probably haven't a spark of imagination in you? I don't care if I do hurt your feelings by saying so. I hope I hurt them. You have hurt mine worse than they were ever hurt before, even my Mrs. Thomas's intoxicated husband, and I'll never forgive you for it. Never, never! Anne, go to your room this instant and stay there until I come up." Anne, bursting into tears, rushed to the hall door, slammed it until the tins on the porch wall outside rattled in sympathy. Marilla found Anne lying face downward on her bed, crying bitterly, quite oblivious to muddy boots on a clean counterpane. "Anne, get off that bed this minute and listen to what I have to say to you. You hadn't any right to fly into such a fury and talk the way you did to her. I was ashamed of you, thoroughly ashamed of you. I wanted you to behave nicely for Mrs. Lynde, but instead of that, you've disgraced me. You must go to her and tell her you are sorry for your bad temper and ask her to forgive you." "I can never do that. You can punish me in any way you like, Marilla. You can shut me up in a dark, damp dungeon inhabited by snakes and toads and feed me on only bread and water, and I shall not complain. But I cannot ask Mrs. Lynde to forgive me." "We are not in the habit of shutting people up in dark, damp dungeons, especially as they are rather scarce in Avonlea. But apologize to Mrs. Lynde you must, and shall, and you'll stay here in your room until you can tell me you're willing to do it." Marilla, upon her return to the house, was agreeably surprised to hear her plaintive voice calling, "Marilla," over the banister. "Well," she said, going into the hall. "I'm sorry I lost my temper and said rude things, and I'm willing to go and tell Mrs. Lynde so." "Very well. I'll take you down after milking." Accordingly, after milking, behold Marilla and Anne walking down the lane, the former erect and triumphant, the latter drooping and dejected. But halfway down, Anne's dejection vanished as if by enchantment. Marilla beheld the change disapprovingly. This was no meek penitence such as it behooved her to take into the presence of the offended Mrs. Lynde. "What are you thinking of, Anne?" "I am imagining what I must say to Mrs. Lynde." This was satisfactory, or should have been so, but Marilla could not rid herself of the notion that something in her scheme of punishment was going askew. Anne had no business to look so rapt and radiant. Rapt and radiant, Anne continued until they were in the very presence of Mrs. Lynde. Then the radiance vanished. Mournful penitence appeared on every feature. Before a word was spoken, Anne suddenly went down on her knees before the astonished Mrs. Lynde and held out her hands beseechingly. "Oh, Mrs. Lynde, I am so extremely sorry. I can never express all of my sorrow. No, not if I used up a whole dictionary. You must just imagine it. I behaved terribly to you, and I have disgraced the dear friends, Matthew and Marilla, who have let me stay at Green Gables, although I'm not a boy. I'm a dreadfully wicked and ungrateful girl, and I deserve to be cast out by respectable people forever. It was very wicked of me to fly into a temper because you told me the truth. It was the truth, every word what you said was true. My hair is red, and I'm freckled and skinny and ugly. What I said about you was true, too, although I shouldn't have said it. Mrs. Lynde, please, please forgive me. If you don't, it will be a lifelong sorrow on a poor little orphan girl. There was no mistaking her sincerity. It breathed in every tone of her voice. Both Marilla and Mrs. Lynde recognized its unmistakable ring. But the former understood in dismay that Anne was actually enjoying her valley of humiliation, was reveling in the thoroughness of her abasement. Where was the wholesome punishment upon which she, Marilla, had plumed herself? Anne had turned into a species of positive pleasure. Good Mrs. Lynde, not being overburdened with perception, did not see this. She only saw that Anne had made a very thorough apology, and all resentment vanished from her kindly, if somewhat officious heart. There, get up, child. Of course I forgive you. Perhaps I guess I am a little too outspoken anyway. You just mustn't mind me, that's what. It can't be denied that your hair is terrible red. But I knew a girl once whose hair was every mite as red as yours when she was young, but when she grew up, it darkened to a real handsome auburn. I wouldn't be a mite surprised if yours did too. Not a mite. Oh, Mrs. Lynde, you've given me a hope. I shall always feel that you are a benefactor. Oh, I can endure anything if I only thought my hair would be a handsome auburn when I grew up. It would be so much easier to be good if one's hair was a handsome auburn, don't you think? And now, may I go into your garden and sit under the apple trees while you and Marilla are talking? There is so much more scope for the imagination there.